courtroom felt heavy when the doors opened. A crowd filled every bench because this case had become the talk of the town. People whispered about the man standing at the defense table. His name was Milan, and many wondered why someone quiet and calm like him would ever be accused of a crime like this. No one in the room knew his real story, and no one knew he was hiding something important in the inside pocket of his jacket. Milan stood tall with a straight back. His eyes slowly scanned the courtroom. He noticed the officers sitting in uniform on the other side. They acted relaxed, but he could see something in their eyes. They were not calm. They were not confident. They looked nervous. One of them kept wiping sweat from his forehead even though the room was not warm. Milan understood why. The truth always made people like them uncomfortable. The judge entered the room and everyone stood. Judge Rahman was known for being strict. He did not like lies, and he did not care who stood in front of him. He wanted truth and nothing else. Once everyone sat, he adjusted his glasses and looked over the files in front of him. Then he lifted his eyes toward Milan. Milan kept his hands on the table. His lawyer sat next to him, but the lawyer had barely spoken to him since morning. Milan did not blame him. The lawyer did not know who Milan truly was. He only knew the case on paper. And the case looked terrible because of the officers' reports. When the judge cleared his throat, the courtroom went silent. Judge Rahman spoke in a calm voice. He said that the officers claimed Milan had resisted them during a simple stop. They said he had become aggressive without reason. They said they feared for their safety. Their reports painted a picture of a dangerous man. The judge lifted the papers as he read. His face stayed blank, but his tone carried doubt. Milan listened without emotion. He knew every word from those reports was false. He also knew the officers expected their plan to work because no one ever questioned their reports. For years, they had used the same method to frame people, and they had never faced consequences. They believed today would be the same. The first officer, named Derek, was called to the stand. He walked with confidence but sat with stiff shoulders. The judge asked him to raise his hand and swear to speak the truth. Derek did it quickly and avoided Milan's eyes. The prosecutor asked Derek to explain what happened that night. Derek started describing a situation that never took place. He said Milan had refused to show his identification. He said Milan used harsh words against them. He said Milan pushed him, which forced him and his partner to act. The more he talked, the more dramatic his story became. People in the audience began to look confused. Something about Derek's testimony did not sound natural. His voice wavered at moments and he kept changing small details. Milan watched quietly. He made no reaction. He wanted Derek to continue because the more Derek spoke, the more he trapped himself in lies. Next, the second officer, Lian, took the stand. Lian looked even more uneasy. He kept his hands locked together as if he was afraid they might shake. He repeated Derek's story, but his version did not match perfectly. He changed the time. He changed the distance. He changed small events that the judge noticed immediately. Judge Rahman leaned back in his chair. His eyes narrowed. He did not interrupt, but the tension in the courtroom grew. The truth was becoming clear. These officers were not describing a real event. They were trying to protect themselves. They thought they had the upper hand. But Milan was calm for a reason they did not know. After Lian finished, the judge asked Milan's lawyer if he wanted to question the witnesses. The lawyer hesitated. He knew something was wrong with their stories, but he did not have evidence to challenge them. He looked at Milan as if asking for help. Milan gave a small nod. He understood that the time was coming. Judge Rahman then turned to Milan. It was his turn to speak if he wished. Milan stood slowly. Every eye in the room turned toward him. He felt the weight of the moment. The officers stared at him with cold expressions. They did not expect him to say anything useful. They thought he had no power to defend himself. Milan took a breath. His voice was steady when he began. He told the judge that he wanted to share his side, but he wanted to be sure he was allowed to reveal something important. Judge Rahman raised an eyebrow and told him to continue carefully. Milan explained how the officers had stopped him without reason. He explained how he had shown his identification, yet they ignored it. He described how they had tried to intimidate him. His simple words carried more weight than the officers' long stories because he spoke with clarity. There were no dramatic details, only truth. The officers shifted in their seats. Derek clenched his jaw. Lian stared at the floor. Then Milan paused. His hand slid toward his jacket. A quiet stir moved across the courtroom. The moment felt strange, as if everyone sensed something big was about to happen. Judge Rahman watched with a serious expression. He asked Milan what he needed to show. Milan replied that he had an item that explained everything, and he wanted to present it to the court. Slowly, Milan reached into his inner pocket. His movements were calm and clear. The officers scanned his hands nervously. They knew they never checked his jacket that night and had no idea what he was about to reveal. The courtroom leaned closer in silence. Milan pulled out a thin black wallet. He opened it with steady fingers. Inside it was an identification card that glowed under the courtroom lights. It was not a simple card. It carried a seal that every officer in the room recognized immediately. It carried a metal emblem on the side and bold letters across the top. Judge Rahman adjusted his glasses again. His eyes widened slightly. The audience gasped. The lawyer beside Milan froze in shock. The identification card belonged to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Milan held it up for everyone to see. His face stayed composed. His voice stayed calm as he said that he had shown this ID to the officers that night, but they pretended they never saw it. They had lied in their reports. They had lied under oath. They had lied because they did not want to admit what they had done. A wave of whispers rushed through the courtroom. The officers' faces turned pale. Derek looked like he could not breathe. Leanne's hands trembled. Judge Rumman lifted his hand to silence the room. His voice carried authority when he told Milan to step forward and place the ID on the bench. Milan did so with respect. The judge examined the card carefully. There was no doubt. It was real. It was official. It was valid. The judge looked up. His voice was firm when he said that this changed everything. The audience held its breath. The officers stared at Milan as if the ground beneath them had disappeared, and Milan, standing tall and calm, knew that this was only the beginning. The courtroom remained silent for several long seconds. It felt like the moment froze in time. Judge Rumman held Milan's FBI ID in his hand, turning it slightly to inspect every detail. The shiny seal, the official markings, and the signature on the card told a story the officers had tried to bury. This was not something a random person could carry. This was proof that Milan worked for a federal agency, and the officers had hidden this truth from the court. Milan stood tall behind the defense table. His lawyer still looked stunned. The prosecutor's face had lost all confidence. The two officers, Derek and Leanne, sat stiff and pale. Their lies had been exposed, and now everyone in the courtroom understood that the situation was much more serious than they first believed. After a long silence, Judge Rumman placed the ID gently on the bench. His voice was firm when he spoke. He said that he needed to understand why a federal agent had been treated this way. He asked Milan to explain everything from the beginning. Milan took a slow breath and prepared to speak. He knew that this was his chance to reveal the truth and show the entire court what had happened that night. Milan began by telling the judge that he was on a quiet assignment when the officers stopped him. He had been gathering information for a federal investigation that involved organized fraud surrounding traffic stops. He explained that the agency had been tracking certain officers who falsely reported events to create charges against innocent people. The case had been ongoing for months, and he had been sent to observe the situation closely. The officers' behavior that night had confirmed the concerns of his agency. Milan's calm voice filled the courtroom. He said he had shown them his ID right away. He had told them clearly who he was and what agency he worked for. Instead of following protocol, the officers had chosen to act as if they had not seen it. They had searched his car without legal cause. They had written a report full of invented claims. They had used their authority to push a lie that they thought would protect them. People in the audience shook their heads in disbelief. Some whispered about how dangerous the situation was. Others stared at the officers, unable to understand why they would risk their careers in such a reckless way. Derek and Leanne kept their eyes down. They looked like they wanted to melt into their seats. Judge Rumman listened without interrupting. He tapped his pen lightly on the desk. When Milan finished explaining, the judge asked him why he had not revealed his FBI identity earlier. Milan replied that he had wanted to see if the officers would correct their report before the trial. He wanted to give them a chance to tell the truth, but they had chosen the opposite path. Milan said that he had reported the situation to his agency, and they had advised him to allow the court process to unfold, so that the truth could be seen clearly. The judge took in every word. It was clear that he was thinking about the next steps. This case was no longer a simple hearing. It had become a matter involving federal misconduct. The courtroom felt heavier than before, filled with tension and disbelief. The prosecutor looked uncomfortable. When the judge asked him if he had known anything about Milan's identity, the prosecutor shook his head quickly. He said he had only been given the officers' reports and had no idea about Milan's federal work. The judge believed him because his reaction looked honest. Still, the prosecutor felt embarrassed. His entire case had collapsed in a single moment. The judge then turned to Derek and asked him to return to the witness stand. Derek walked slowly. He looked like a man who had lost all hope. His hands shook when he sat down. The judge asked him a simple question. He asked why Derek had written a false report about a federal agent. Derek did not answer at first. He stared at the desk in front of him. The courtroom waited. Finally, Derek spoke in a weak voice. He said he had been under pressure from certain people in his department. He said they had been told to increase arrests and charges, even if the situations did not call for it. He said he had made a mistake that night because he thought it would be easier to go along with the system than question it. He admitted that he had seen Milan's ID. He admitted that he ignored it. He admitted that he had lied in court. A wave of shock moved through the audience. The truth was out. Derek had confessed. Judge Rumman then asked Leanne to take the stand again. Leanne looked terrified. He sat down slowly, gripping the edges of the chair. He admitted that he had followed Derek's lead. He confessed that he had seen Milan's FBI card too. He said he had been afraid to speak up because he did not want to lose his job. His voice cracked as he spoke because he knew that his silence would cost him even more. Now the judge leaned forward. His tone was calm but powerful. He told the officers that lying in court was a serious offense. He said their actions had not only harmed Milan but had damaged the trust between the public and the police force. His words echoed through the room. After listening to the officers, the judge looked at Milan. He thanked him for acting professionally despite the treatment he had faced. He said he respected the way Milan had handled the situation without anger or impatience. Milan nodded respectfully. He did not seek praise. He only wanted the truth to be seen. The judge then announced that the hearing would continue after a short break because he needed to speak privately with certain officials. As soon as the judge left the room, the audience erupted in whispers. Some people walked out shaking their heads. Others stayed in their seats, unable to move, still shocked by everything they had heard. Milan sat quietly. His lawyer asked him why he never told him the truth about being a federal agent. Milan replied that he had been instructed to keep his identity limited during the early stages of the case. He said he appreciated the lawyer's effort even if the lawyer had not known his full background. The lawyer nodded awkwardly, still trying to process the situation. Derek and Leanne remained in the corner of the room. They looked like their entire world had collapsed. Their careers were at risk. Their futures were uncertain. They had never expected that the man they tried to frame would be someone with federal authority. Outside the courtroom, the hall filled with reporters who had heard about the dramatic turn inside. They waited for the judge's next decision. The courtroom doors stayed closed, but everyone inside could hear the noise growing outside. The media already sensed that this case would become a major headline. After the break, the judge returned. This time, his face looked even more serious. He said he had contacted federal officials to verify Milan's identity and to report the officer's actions. Everything had been confirmed. Milan was indeed part of a federal operation. The judge said the court would now allow Milan to continue explaining any important details for the record. Milan stood again. He said he had more information to share, but he needed permission from his agency to reveal additional details. He took out a secure phone from his pocket. The judge agreed to wait while Milan contacted his superior. The courtroom watched in silence as he stepped aside and dialed a number. After a few moments, Milan returned and nodded to the judge. He had received clearance to reveal certain things. The judge allowed him to speak. Milan said that the operation he worked on involved uncovering hidden corruption in certain parts of the police department. He said the officers who stopped him were not the only ones under observation. There were others. The room filled with tension again. Everyone realized that this was far bigger than two officers lying in court. Before Milan could continue, the courtroom doors opened, and a group of federal officials entered the room. They walked with purpose, and their presence changed the atmosphere completely. People moved aside to give them space. The officers on the other side shrank even further in their seats. Milan looked at them and knew that the next stage of the case was about to begin. The truth was no longer in shadows. It was now standing in the center of the courtroom. When the federal officials entered the courtroom, everyone understood that the situation had changed completely. Their presence brought a new level of seriousness that spread across the room like a quiet storm. The judge stood out of respect, and the entire courtroom followed. The officials approached the bench calmly. Each step they took showed confidence and purpose. The leader of the group was a tall woman named Rena. She carried a folder in her hand and gave a respectful nod to Judge Rumman. The judge returned the gesture and asked her to introduce herself for the record. Rena spoke in a clear and steady voice. She said she was the supervising agent in charge of the operation that Milan was part of. She also said they had arrived to support the court and to ensure that all information related to the case was handled correctly. Milan watched them silently. He knew Rena well. She was strict but fair, and she always valued truth above everything. Her presence meant that the agency had decided this case needed direct attention from the highest level. Judge Rumman invited Rena to explain the federal side of the investigation. Rena stepped forward and placed the folder on the bench. She opened it and revealed several documents. She said the agency had been monitoring a group of officers for several months. They had received reports of false charges, fabricated incidents, and misuse of authority. The operation was meant to gather evidence and identify everyone involved. Rena explained that Milan had been chosen because of his ability to stay calm under pressure. His mission was to observe and document any irregular actions. She said he had done exactly that on the night he was stopped by Derek and Leanne. She confirmed that Milan had presented his ID immediately, and the officers had ignored it. She also confirmed that the agency had watched their actions from a distance. The courtroom listened without moving. Every word carried weight. Every sentence revealed a truth stronger than the last. Derek and Leanne looked completely defeated. Their shoulders had dropped, and their faces were empty of confidence. They seemed to shrink into their seats as Rena continued speaking. When she revealed that their conversation had been recorded that night, the officers finally understood that there was no escape from the truth. Judge Rumman took a breath and asked Rena if she had brought the recordings. Rena nodded. She instructed one of the officials to play the audio for the court. The official placed a small device on the judge's desk. A quiet sound filled the room, and then the voices of Derek and Leanne began to play. The recording captured everything. It showed how they planned to ignore Milan's ID, It showed how they discussed writing a report that would place blame on him. It showed their intention to secure an arrest even though they had no legal reason. Their voices sounded confident in the audio, but everyone in the courtroom could see how broken they looked now. When the recording ended, silence returned. It felt even heavier than before. The judge leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to steady himself. He had heard many cases in his career, but this one carried deep disappointment. He opened his eyes and spoke in a measured tone. He said the recordings, the testimony, and the federal confirmation painted a clear picture. He said there was no doubt that Milan had been honest from the beginning. He also said that the officers had not only lied but had misused the trust placed in them. The judge then turned to Milan. He invited him to continue explaining anything important from his mission. Milan stepped forward. His voice was calm, steady, and respectful. He said he had been shadowing districts that showed unusual patterns in arrests. He said the agency had noticed that certain officers were connected through reports that repeated the same errors. He explained that the agency had instructed him to allow real events to unfold so they could gather solid evidence. Milan said he had hoped Derek and Leon would act professionally when they saw his ID. He said he had given them a chance to correct their mistake even after the stop. He said he had waited to see if they would change their report. But when the agency received a false report from them, the mission took a serious turn. The audience listened with growing tension. Some covered their mouths. Others shook their heads slowly. When Milan finished speaking, the judge thanked him. Then he turned to the prosecutor. The prosecutor admitted that he had been unaware of any federal involvement. He also said he had been shocked by the recordings. It was clear that he felt embarrassed for building a case based on lies. The judge acknowledged his honesty after that. The judge faced Derek and Leanne. His voice was controlled but strong. He asked them if they had anything to say before he made a decision. Derek stood slowly. He looked tired and lost. He admitted he had no excuse. He said he had made a choice that he now regretted deeply. Leanne followed. He said he had allowed fear and pressure to guide his actions. He said he knew he had failed his responsibility. Their voices did little to change anything. The courtroom had already heard enough. Dodge Ruman announced that the court would issue an order to hold both officers for further investigation. He said their actions required review by both the department and federal officials. He asked the bailiffs to approach. Derek and Leanne did not resist. They stood with lowered heads as the bailiffs escorted them away. Many people in the audience watched without speaking. The moment felt serious and sad. After the officers were taken out, the judge looked at Milan. He said he respected the discipline Milan had shown. He also said he appreciated the agency's effort to uncover misconduct. He announced that all charges against Milan were dismissed without delay. The courtroom reacted with a soft wave of relief. Milan's lawyer smiled for the first time since the case began. Several people nodded at Milan as a sign of respect. But the matter was not over. Rena stepped forward again. She said the agency was not done with the investigation. She said Milan still had an important role to play. The judge asked her to explain carefully. Rena said that the agency believed the corruption within the department went beyond the two officers. She said more names might appear as they continued their work. She said the case in front of the court was only the beginning of a much bigger problem. Milan listened with full attention. He already knew this. His assignment had only reached its first major point. Now the real challenge would begin. The judge allowed Milan and the federal team to speak privately in a side room. The reporters outside tried to push forward, but the bailiffs held them back. The hall was full of flashing lights and loud voices. Inside the side room, Rena closed the door and looked at Milan. She said the agency needed him to continue the mission. She said that now the department knew they were being watched, things would become harder. She said some people might try to hide evidence or silence anyone who tried to speak. She explained that Milan had to stay cautious but also stay determined. Milan nodded. He asked what the next stage would be. Rena opened her folder again. She showed him a list of names. Each name was connected to suspicious activity. Some were officers, some were supervisors, some were clerks who handled reports. All of them could be part of a bigger network. Milan took the folder and studied it. The task looked difficult. The mission would require patience and careful planning, but he felt ready. He knew he could not step back after everything that had happened. Rena told him that the judge would soon give instructions about the next court date. She also said the agency would coordinate with the court to reveal evidence step by step. Milan understood. He was prepared to stand in court again if needed. A knock on the door signaled that the judge wanted to speak with them. The federal team in Milan returned to the courtroom. The judge said he wanted to keep close watch on the investigation. He said he would schedule additional hearings to ensure transparency. He said the court would not allow misconduct to hide in darkness any longer. Milan looked around the courtroom. The audience had not left. They watched him with respect. They had seen how calm and brave he had been. They had seen how lies fell apart in front of him. The judge asked the federal officials to stand beside Milan. Their presence showed the strength of the truth. The judge said the next chapters of the case would be even more important than the first. Milan stood with steady eyes. He knew the path ahead would not be easy. He knew the next part of the mission would reveal more secrets and more challenges. This was no longer only about him. It was about justice for everyone affected by the corruption. The courtroom lights reflected on his FBI card resting on the bench. It was the symbol of the truth he carried, and now the entire court knew that Milan was ready for the next stage. The courtroom slowly emptied after the hearing, but Milan stayed behind with the federal team. The quiet room felt different now. It no longer held tension from lies. Instead, it carried the weight of a new responsibility. Milan stood near the defense table with the folder Rena had given him held tightly in his hand. Inside were names that could change everything. Each name represented a person who might be connected to the corruption. He had been investigating for months. Rena approached him with a serious expression. She said the agency expected things to become more difficult from this point. She explained that once the department learned that Milan was a federal agent, those involved in misconduct would either hide or try to protect themselves. She said some might try to destroy evidence. Some might pressure others to stay quiet. Some might even leave their positions to avoid being caught. Milan listened carefully. He understood the dangers. He had seen this pattern before in other cases. When truth became clear, those who feared it usually became unpredictable. But he did not feel afraid. His calm nature made him a strong and steady force in situations like this. The judge met with the federal team once more before leaving. Judge Rumman said he wanted updates on every part of the investigation. He said his court would remain open for any new information. He told Milan that he respected his patience and bravery. Milan thanked him respectfully. Later that afternoon, Milan and Rena walked out of the courthouse into a crowded yard filled with reporters. Cameras flashed. Microphones reached toward them. People shouted questions from every direction. Milan kept a straight face, and Rena signaled the officials to clear a path. They moved through the crowd without answering any questions. It was not time for public statements. The mission required silence. They entered a black car waiting nearby. Once the doors closed, the noise from outside faded. Inside the car, Rena opened her tablet. She showed Milan a chart that outlined connections between the officers under suspicion. The lines on the chart formed a web of names, dates, and shared reports. Rena said the agency believed the corruption might have begun with only a few people. Over time, it grew because no one questioned it. She explained that sometimes people followed orders even when they knew something was wrong. It created a chain that became harder to break. Milan studied the chart with focused eyes. He noticed something important. Several reports with similar mistakes came from different officers, yet they connected to the same supervisor. That meant the corruption was not random. It had been organized. He pointed at the name written near the center of the chart. The name was Supervisor Rule. Rena nodded. She said they had suspected Supervisor Rule for a long time, but they needed strong evidence before taking action. She said Milan's experience in court had given the investigation a new direction. She asked if Milan felt prepared to meet with people inside the department who might still be honest. Milan said he was ready. The car drove to the federal office. The building was secure and quiet. Inside, Milan met two more agents named Samir and Tara. They were assigned to help him with the next part of the mission. Samir specialized in gathering digital evidence from internal systems. Tara focused on interviewing witnesses and tracing old reports. Each of them respected Milan because of how he handled himself during the court hearing. They sat together in a conference room. Milan placed the folder on the table. Tara opened it and read the list of names. She recognized some of them from earlier investigations. Samir checked his laptop for any patterns connected to the names. Rena stood by the window, arms crossed, thinking deeply. Milan suggested starting with someone who might speak honestly. On the list was a clerk named Harris. He was known to be quiet and careful, but he had always submitted reports exactly as they were given. Milan believed Harris might help because he had never been involved in suspicious behavior. He was someone who followed rules and respected order, Rena agreed. She said Harris worked in the records division. She instructed the team to approach him carefully. They needed to make sure no one warned him before they arrived. If he were pressured by corrupt officers, he might stay silent. If they reached him first, he might open up. Later that evening, Milan and Tara visited the records division. The building was old, with tall shelves full of documents and files. Harris sat at a desk near the back, typing quietly. When he looked up and saw Milan and Tara approaching, he stood with a nervous expression. Milan introduced himself again, though Harris had already recognized him from the case that morning. Harris asked quietly if everything was all right. Milan said they needed to ask him a few important questions. Tara explained that they were looking into some old reports and needed clarity. Harris hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. He invited them to sit near his desk. Milan asked about several reports that had similar mistakes. Harris opened the digital system and searched for them. His hands shook slightly as he typed. When he found the reports, he pointed out something interesting. He said all those reports had been edited by Supervisor Rule before they were approved. Harris said he did not know why the supervisor made changes, but the pattern was clear. Tara asked if Harris ever questioned these edits. Harris said he did not feel safe doing so. He said people who questioned too much often got moved to different units. Some were pushed out. He said he wanted to keep his job, so he stayed quiet. Milan gave Harris a calm look. He told him that the agency was investigating the situation. He said Harris was not in trouble. He said they needed his help to understand the truth. Harris let out a slow breath. He said he had noticed strange things for months. He said he did not want to hide anything anymore. Harris told them something unexpected. He said Supervisor Rule kept a private locked cabinet inside his office. The cabinet was never listed on record, and no one else had access to it. Harris believed it contained documents the supervisor did not want anyone to see. Tara looked at Milan. She knew this was important. Milan thanked Harris for his honesty. He told him to stay calm and continue working as usual. Tara assured him that he would be protected after leaving the records division. Milan reported everything to Rena. She narrowed her eyes slightly. The locked cabinet confirmed their suspicion. To access it legally, they needed a warrant. Rena said they would request one immediately. The judge who handled Milan's case would likely approve it because he knew the seriousness of the investigation. The next morning, they received the warrant. Rena, Samir, Tara, and Milan drove to the station where Supervisor Rule worked. The atmosphere inside the building was tense. People whispered as the federal team walked through the halls. Word had spread about the officers who were taken away the day before. Everyone looked nervous. Supervisor Rule sat in his office with a calm expression when they arrived. He stood and tried to act confident, but Milan noticed a flicker of fear in his eyes. Rena handed him the warrant. She said they needed to inspect his office. Rule stepped aside reluctantly. Samir searched the drawers. Tara inspected the computer. Rena checked the shelves. Milan walked toward the locked cabinet Harris had mentioned. It stood in the corner, tall and metal. Milan tried the handle. It was locked, just as expected. Rena asked Rule for the key. He hesitated but eventually took a small key from his pocket. Milan unlocked the cabinet. Inside were dozens of files. Some had red marks. Some had handwritten notes. Some had names that appeared on the list in Milan's folder. Then Milan found something else. A small notebook filled with dates, initials, and coded descriptions. Samir stepped closer and looked over Milan's shoulder. Samir recognized several codes that matched old digital alterations. This notebook was powerful evidence. It connected everything. It showed who approved which reports. It showed who benefited. It showed the timeline of every suspicious action. Supervisor Rule's face turned pale. He understood that his secrets were now uncovered. Rena closed the cabinet and collected all the files. She asked Rule to sit down. She said he would be taken for questioning. The entire station grew silent as the federal team walked out with the evidence. Milan held the notebook in his hand. He knew this was only the beginning of uncovering the complete truth. The morning sun rose slowly over the city, and the courtroom was prepared once again. This time the atmosphere was different. People were not whispering in fear or confusion. They were whispering in anticipation. Everyone wanted to see what would happen now that the truth about the corrupt officers had come out. Everyone knew this hearing would decide more than one man's case. It would decide whether justice still lived in this place or not. Armand stood outside the courthouse with a calm face. He had not slept much, but his eyes showed quiet strength. He had spent the night thinking about everything. His work as an undercover FBI agent had forced him to stay silent for a long time, but now he felt lighter. The burden was not gone, but it was no longer crushing him. Today he would close this chapter. Samir arrived shortly after. He held a thick file and looked ready for a long battle. He greeted Armand with a firm nod. Samir respected Armand even more now, not only because he was innocent, but because he had stood up against people who tried to misuse their power. Samir adjusted his tie and said he was ready to finish what they started inside the courtroom. The judge entered with a serious expression. He did not want delays. He wanted answers. He called the session to order and asked for Armand to take the stand once again. This time there was no tension on Armand's face. He stepped forward with steady steps, took his seat, and folded his hands on the table. His voice was clear as he spoke. He explained how his mission started, why he came to the city, and how the corrupt officers targeted him after they discovered he was looking into their activities. He explained how he stayed silent because revealing his identity too early would have destroyed months of work. Every sentence was simple, firm, and honest. The judge listened carefully. The court listened carefully. Even the reporters listened without blinking. Then Samir presented more evidence. He showed documents confirming Armand's undercover mission. He showed reports from other investigations these officers tried to interfere with. He showed communication records that linked the officers to illegal acts. The judge took notes without pause. The courtroom fell silent. For a long moment, only pages turning could be heard when the judge allowed cross-examination. The defense lawyer did not step forward. Instead, he stood up slowly and announced that he could not continue defending officers who had clearly acted without honesty. He said he respected the court too much to drag the case any further. His statement surprised the room, but no one disagreed now. The judge turned his attention to the accused officers. They sat with lowered heads. Their faces showed regret mixed with fear. They knew their lies had fallen apart. They knew their actions had been exposed. The judge asked them to stand, and they did so with shaking hands. He asked if they still had anything to say in their defense. The senior officer raised his head and said he made mistakes. He said he let power blind him. He said he never expected the man they tried to frame would actually be an FBI agent. He apologized to the court, to the community, and to Arman, but the words sounded empty. They were too late, and everyone knew that apology did not change what they had done. The judge gave his final decision. He ruled that Arman was fully innocent. He also ruled that the officers would face charges for lying under oath, misuse of authority, and attempting to manipulate evidence. The courtroom reacted with quiet shock, then relief, then satisfaction. Justice had taken time, but it arrived with strength. Arman exhaled slowly. He felt a weight lift from his shoulders. This was not victory in a proud way. It was victory in a peaceful way. A victory of truth over fear. He looked at Samir and nodded. Samir smiled for the first time in days. The tension between them melted away, replaced by respect and trust. Porters rushed toward Arman outside the courthouse. They asked many questions. How long was he undercover? Why did the officers target him? How did he stay calm under pressure? Arman answered only what he was allowed to. He said he respected the justice system and believed truth would always rise in the end. He said he hoped the city would learn from this case and build a safer future after the reporters left. Samir invited Arman for a small tea break near the courthouse. They sat outside a quiet shop, feeling the gentle wind on their faces. Samir looked at Arman and said he admired his patience. Arman smiled and said he admired Samir's courage to defend a man everyone doubted at first. Their bond had grown stronger than a simple client and lawyer relationship. It was now a bond of loyalty. Later that day, Arman returned to his office. His FBI team welcomed him back with respect. They had watched the hearing from afar and were proud that he handled everything with calm strength. His supervisor told him that his undercover mission was completed successfully. The team handed him a new case file, but Arman laughed softly and said he needed at least one day to breathe before diving into another mission. When he finally walked out of the building, the city felt different. The streets were the same, the traffic was the same, but something inside him had changed. He felt stronger. He felt lighter. He felt ready for whatever came next. As he walked down the road, the sky above him slowly turned golden. People passed by without knowing anything about his struggle. But Arman did not mind. He did not need recognition. He did not need applause. He only needed the peace that came from knowing he did the right thing. Truth had won. Justice had stood tall. And Arman walked forward with a calm heart, ready for the future that awaited him.